Good morning, Southeast. I hope you're doing well. This last Sunday, we started a sermon series. We're walking through the book of Exodus, and I hope you enjoyed it. What we learned this last week is that Jesus is our true deliverer. So the book of Exodus is a story about how God brought the Israelites out of slavery, out of bondage, into the promised land, and he used this character named Moses to do that. And what we look at in the story is that we recognize that it actually points us forward to what Jesus does for us, is that we are in bondage and slavery and sin and dead in our transgressions, as the New Testament says. And we have no way out, but then God raises up Jesus and brings us into freedom, into victory. And so that's what we hope for this sermon series, is that as we're walking through this, you would recognize that Jesus is our true deliverer, that you would begin to see Jesus more clearly. And for some of you, that's maybe for the very first time, you've never surrendered your life to Christ, and you're trying to figure out how life is working, and you're just kind of stuck, and you're like, God, how do I get out of this? Well, it's when we surrender our lives to Jesus. But for others of us, we have a tendency to go back to our slavery. We have a tendency to go back to our bondage, and you don't have to. We don't have to. Jesus is our true deliverer, and he will never fail you. He will never abandon you. You can trust him. And what's really cool about this is that he is bringing us into a promised land as well. And the book of Hebrews captures this well. In Hebrews 3:3-6, it says, "For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of the house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken of later." So again, that pointing us forward to Jesus. "But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house, if indeed we hold fast to our confession and our boasting in our hope." And so right now in this period of waiting, he gives us the church, that you and I, we get to be part of the community that is ambassadors for the kingdom, that we are part of his people, and he will never abandon us. But ultimately it leads us to eternity with Christ and with God, and that's an amazing thing to be part of. So I just want, again, through this sermon series, we hope that you just see Jesus more clearly. But it kind of comes back to this other thing too, is like, what do you do while you're waiting? And, as we're waiting for Christ to return, as we're waiting to step into eternity with him, like, what do we do in this moment? And I was just reminded of, as we're looking at the story in Exodus chapter 2 captures a 40-year time span. And I think what happens sometimes is that when we read the Bible, we turn the pages and we go from book to chapter to verse to word, as we're going through that. And we forget that sometimes even between the verses, there are, if not days, weeks, even years that pass. And so when Moses fled, he fled. He ended up killing a person in Egypt. He was brought up in Pharaoh's house. He thought that he was going to be God's deliverer, and he saw an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew, and so he goes to rescue this guy, and he thought, this is it. Well, the Hebrews didn't think so. And so Moses fled to Midian. And Moses was about 40 years old when that happened. And the next time we see Jesus, or we see the burning bush, God is calling him, and he's 80 years old. And so we have a 40-year time span of Moses being in exile. And I know maybe for some of you that you might feel like you're in exile. You might be waiting for God to move. Maybe you were like Moses. He thought he was going to be a deliverer, and then ends up in the desert. And we don't know, but my guess is he probably thought, okay, well, I guess that delivering thing isn't going to happen. So I'll just live out my life over here. Maybe you thought that God was moving in your life, and then he felt like you got abandoned, that you got forgotten. Well, I just want to remind us that in this exile, God was working in Moses' life. And I am trusting that in your exile, when you are feeling lonely, when you are feeling abandoned, when you are feeling like you are out in the desert, that God is not done with you. That just because God is silent does not mean that God is absent. No, we see God moving in Moses' life and actually preparing him for the next season. And so the first thing that happened is that Starting in chapter 2, verse 16, it says, "Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and they drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock." So we see in Moses in this moment that he has compassion, that he is still is looking out for the weak. He has this posture of protecting. In verse 18 then it says, "When they came home to their father Reuel, he said, 'How is it that you have come home so soon today?' They said, 'An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock.' And he said to his daughters, 'And where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread.' And Moses was content to dwell with the man." And so in this moment, God gave him a godly house, a place where he could learn about God through Reuel. And then going on, and the next part of that verse, verse 21, he says, "And he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah." And so not only did we see compassion in Moses' life, and we see that God gave him a godly home to live in, we see that also God gave him a wife. And then the text goes on to say in verse 22, "She gave birth to a son and called his name Gershom, for he said, 'I have been a sojourner in a foreign land.'" And so he gave Moses a family. And so that's the thing that I just want us to remember, is that I know there are times in our lives where we feel abandoned, where we feel lost, like we are so alone. But I just want to encourage you, to remind you that just because God is silent does not mean that he is absent. And he is probably doing something in your heart, drawing you closer to him. Maybe it's just that he wants you to cry out to him more, that he wants a deeper dependency on him. And he is doing something in your life, and he's probably preparing you for what's next. And so I just want to give you that encouragement today. Hey, we got some cool things happening that's coming up. First up, on the 12th, this Thursday, we have senior lunch. They took a break for the summer, but now we have senior lunch, and it's a great time. It's one of my favorite days of the month to get together with some of the older people in our congregation, and it starts at 10:30. Love to have you join us. And then also coming up this weekend, we have the food bank and clothing closet. Again, if you need anything, be sure to stop by. If you know anybody that needs anything, be sure to come up by and grab something and give it to them. That's from 9 to 11 this Saturday, the 14th. And then once a month we teach this class. It's called First Step. It's if you are new to Southeast, love to have you join us. It's a chance where we can get to know each other. You can ask questions, and we can tell you a little bit about how to get involved, because we know that it can be intimidating to jump into a church environment, and you're just kind of like, what are these groups? What are these teams? What is this all about? So love to have you come with that. And then mark your calendar. This is really cool. On the 29th, the student ministry is going to do an open house, and that's from 5 to 7. We're going to feed you. There's going to be a dinner. But Gracie, our student ministry resident, is preparing this. And this isn't just for the students and their parents. This is for anybody that wants to know more about the student ministry and the kind of the direction it's going. And we're just really excited to be able to offer this. And so it's our student ministry open house on the 29th. Love to have you come and join us. Southeast, I love you. I pray that you have a wonderful, wonderful week, and that you truly see Jesus as your true deliverer, and that you trust him.